Hey, it's Wednesday for Wise Guys, and today we're going to talk about leadership and loneliness. I've seen so many articles about the epidemic of loneliness lately. We're going to look at one article and we're going to talk about the perspective of leadership. So here is the article: Why a Third Life is the Answer to America's Loneliness Crisis, by Adam Chandler, and this was a few days ago. I cut out most of the article, but I have some things highlighted here that it's worth talking about. And it's a little out of context. Go read the article for the whole thing, but the discussion is important. He was right to worry. These days, the role of coffee shops and bars, libraries and community centers, civic clubs and houses of worship have faded as the creep of work and domestic obligation in American life have become all but inescapable. According to the 2021 Census Bureau's Time Use Survey, Americans were already spending significantly less time with friends before the pandemic rearranged life entirely. Our collective isolation has only metastasized since then. In 2024, a staggering 17% of Americans claimed to have zero friends, up from 1% in 1990. 17% of Americans in 2024 claimed to have zero friends. As a journalist reporting on the culture of work in American life, I found that the unnerving consequences from this social and civic decay go well beyond what the data conveys. We already know that Americans are working longer hours than most of our peer nations, with less money and less stability to show for it. For many people, the cost of living has increasingly turned free time into a luxury. And in the place of in-person socialization, we've bent our necks toward our screens. And while it may feed us an endless stream of perfect corgi videos, it has also allowed work to seep into our off hours and has facilitated an unprecedented loneliness crisis among younger Americans. Endorphins and digital high fives aside, crushing a Peloton ride is simply no match for doing something, anything, with another person in real life. In other words, at the street level, Americans are going through their days with hardly any interactions with people who are different from them. Whether it's through a noble commitment to volunteering, a noble commitment to something new that we're simply terrible at doing, talking to new people, or the steady building of regular social outings, creating a framework that is safe from the reach of obligation or the temptation of performative busyness is a higher calling for this lonely and polarized moment. Now, whole article's great. I suggest you read it, but I have these sections for a reason. And we're going to look at some questions. Remember, we're really sticking with this leadership theme for this particular talk. And leadership in terms of alignment of intentions and actions and consequences. So back to our main page here. What if we say, you and I, that we want everyone in the world who's an owner, manager, boss, or supervisor to read this article and have a discussion about what we're going over real quick? Everyone in the world, every single boss, every single person in charge. And these are the things to think about. What is loneliness? This is all crafted around this idea of the loneliness epidemic. What is loneliness? What do you think loneliness is? I could say for my personality type, I have never been lonely in my entire life. I've been isolated. Isolated is a state of being. Lonely is a feeling. So to fix, from a leadership perspective, to fix the loneliness epidemic, the loneliness crisis, you have to understand what loneliness is. That's important. He talks about the culture of work. What is the culture of work? He talks about the cost of living. Where does this come from? He talks about working more hours, but for less financial security and social stability, work seeping into off hours. These are just small phrases that he's using in his article to give an underlying subtext. And sometimes he's getting a little judgy based on his language, but there's so much going on in what he's saying. What is the reach of obligation? What is the temptation of performative busyness? These are interesting phrases that he uses. And why does he use the word noble when he says we should do noble volunteering or noble committing. The use of language is really interesting. More questions to ask. Who sets the prices that affect the cost of living? And who designs the hardware, software, and algorithmic elements that have created isolationist and loneliness practices when we do look at our screens? Plus, what elements of culture lead to potential overspending? This is back to that cost of living concept that would require more money, which in turn creates the need to work longer hours. Every one of those questions is a huge discussion on its own. Remember, we're fixing the loneliness crisis, and you are the leader. You are the boss. You are the manager. We are the supervisors in charge. And we're thinking to ourselves, oh, people are lonely. People have no friends. As leaders, what do we do? So the leadership elements here, the leadership challenge is to solve the loneliness epidemic. This means after your solution is implemented, the people who currently say that they are lonely don't say that anymore. That's how you fix the crisis. If you give a survey to 1,000 people and 500 of them say they're lonely, how do you get those same 500 people who say they're not lonely? What do they have to go through for them not to feel lonely? In this case, we're going to have 3 avenues: legislative, sociocultural, and personal. So from the legislative angle, if you were acting as a formally elected top politician, what federal laws could you enact to solve the loneliness crisis? You are a leader. You are a formally elected leader. And say that you wouldn't have any issues with courts. You just get to say how you are going to solve the loneliness crisis from a federally legislative perspective. 2, acting as a community leader, what socio-cultural norms would you add or subtract to solve the loneliness crisis? Maybe not add or subtract. What cultural behavior would you promote? And which would you try to do away with? Not through legislation, but through group pressure, right? Through, this is a good idea. Not that people have to do something, but here's something we can do as a smaller community to solve the loneliness crisis. And third, acting as a personal therapist. If you are a personal therapist as a leader, what are your mandates to a lonely client? So there's 3 levels here we're working on. Why do people feel lonely individually, one-on-one? Why do people feel lonely within their community? And third, why do people feel lonely within their whole culture? I have ideas. I don't have answers, right? I'm not giving advice. I'm not judging lonely people. I am asking questions about leadership techniques. Now, the answers and the discussions to this would be hours, days, weeks, months long. But if you are a person in a leadership position and you have people under you who are lonely, and you have these 3 avenues, legislative, sociocultural, and personal, how are we fixing the loneliness crisis? In that article, back in the article, he seems to have answers, but he's not really saying them. The subtext in this whole article is quite amazing, because the language that he chooses to use suggests what he thinks would work, but he doesn't say it explicitly. And again, this is a conversation about what is loneliness and what is the solution to loneliness from a leadership perspective. You have power as a leader to adjust life parameters for people who not necessarily depend on you, but who are affected by you. Fun question, cool discussion. And I have my own thoughts about it, but I'm more interested in getting a discussion started between you and the people that you are in charge of. So yes, this is Wednesday for Wise Guys. Thanks for joining.